My name is Peter Kamara. I am from Sierra Leone. I'm here to present the rising financial reporting standard and the financial stability for banks in Sierra Leone, especially in Sierra Leone. This study is basically is a point study to actually introduce to the world wide you have like financial stability when you're thinking about sustainable development, especially the conference we are today. One of the major things I want to share with you is when you want to talk about sustainability, you need to look at your financial stress and where you are and where you're going. So basically, we look at the financial sector, which is maybe basically the banks, and where they are before the Ebola was struck. So when the Ebola was everywhere in West Africa, and a lot of financial meltdown was taking place. So when you're talking about sustainability, you need to look at the benchmark where you are before, and when you have that kind of shock, what do you do and where you are. So I'm going to look at I'm going to introduce the topic. As I've just done, and the methodology what we did. And some analysis on the banks. Sectors and the investment activities for the period under review. And the liquidity issues across the retail banking sector in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and the corporate and consumer and corporate lending. And then we look at the stress test of the banks using Ultima model and the return on the capital itself. Then look at whether Sierra Leone itself their financial positions really they were reporting in accordance with the IFRS standards. So basically we are going to look at the profitability analysis of this very key sector and the liquidity activity. The liquidity, sorry, investment activity, liquidity across retail banks, and consumer and corporate lending, and the stress test. So these are basically what we are going to look at. So I went through this very short. One, we look at the published accounts from key banks in the country, and so we try to do a drawback. The Ebola started in 2014, and then we need to assess the banks where they are before the Ebola struck, so that we'll be able to weigh them whether they were actually ready for that very shock, for sustainable growth, whether there is a shock in future or not. So what we did was to look what I did was to look backwards in 2013 where they are, and then look at the financial statement where they are, and then look at the banking act itself, or the Financial Service Act, that allow them to operate, whether they are in compliance with the act as well, and then do some desktop review on the very top. Topic I'm researching on. So when you look at the next slide, in the profitability analysis of the banks, when when I have done all the analysis, we find out that out of the seven banks, Guaranteed Trust Bank was one of the leading banks that projected a 3.7 billion in US dollar as a profit within that very year, and followed by the UBA, United Bank for Africa, and the case scenarios just to test where they were in terms of profitability. And looking at their investment activity, what we look at deeply is to see whether they were actually doing the investment in the best interest of the bank, or to be able to share the equity very well in terms of whether there is a shop where their money can be or whatever. So we try to test the banking sector itself to see how they were using their funds and where they're investing. So out of this very banks, what we see is like one of the banks, FI Bank, which was the highest, up to 36%. They spend, they try to more place their money into investment. They invest into treasury bills, into secure investments. That what they actually focus on. Whereas the United Bank, Trust Bank itself, the asset rating was really low, so they did not invest that much. Instead, they invested in other areas. So in terms of really quality investment, only one bank was doing a better job there, and followed by Standard Chartered Bank in Sierra Leone. So when I look at the liquidity across these very banks, we find out that indeed only two banks, that actually maintain the liquidity position based on the Banking Act, that stipulated that every bank should be able to be at least within a ratio of 25%, and they should be able to hold certain number of funds in order to keep them going. So almost all the other banks, about four of them really did not meet the liquidity threshold. So when the Ebola struck, these very main banks really were the reason why they were really affected, except when they were able to bail them out. But the liquidity position as at 2013, they did not maintain this very one. So that is the beauty aspect of it, to look at them in 2013, where they were and why really they went into a liquidity positions, or into a very constrained position. So anyway, when you look at the way they were trading in terms of the way they're lending their asset itself, I was able to pick out the Union Trust Bank. Instead of them investing on a very secured trading, like the treasury bills, going to a lot of good security that can secure their assets. Instead, they more focus their lending onto risk assets. So basically, They have a chunk load of assets which really has been held. People have not been able to pay them. So in terms of the rotation of the assets, really was stuck in one side on giving out so much loans and advances to the public. So it makes them to stop. And that's why if you look at the liquidity aspect, they were far below below the line itself because they could not actually meet the very threshold. When we look at the stress tests to really just pick them to say, okay, why really, when the Ebola comes in, why are they really, really affected and what happens? So when you look, we'll look at the stress test itself. We're able to notice that only one bank, Sky Bank, that almost meets the threshold, which is 1.24. And to look at this stress test, we look at a lot of variables. One, I look at the aspect of their liquidity position, their asset, their investment, a lot of other criteria we are looked at, and we'll be able to come up with this very conclusion. So you see most of them, most of these very banks, from Standard Chartered Bank, UBA, across the board, you will find out that only one bank was able to meet the threshold. And the reason why this bank was able to meet the threshold is because they focus their trading basically on investment, and they actually did not use the share capital itself to lend or trade. So they were just stand still. They could not even use their capital itself to trade into a lot of other activities. So because they have so much funds, so much capital held within their coffer, at least makes them to be in this very grade. But all those other banks, when you match with their capital ratios and even the investments they have, their share capital, you will find out that really basically they are just below the line. So when the Ebola comes, except when some of them they have a lot of foreign subsidiaries who help them to actually fund them to be able to stay alive. That's the only way they were able to survive. But these other banks, at least even after the shock, they were still strong and be able to maintain, in terms of their investment activities. So I mean, look at it. Even as all this, one bank I will pick when it comes to profitability. Guarantee Tools Bank, which is here, was really almost 70%, was able to return over 70% to their own share capital. And they made one of the highest profits before the Ebola scourge. And even though with all these profits they had made, when you look at the stress test, they were far below because they invested their securities so great that they give loans. They diversify their investment, and at the end of the day, what happened is like they were almost below when the Ebola scourge was struck, except they were bailed out again. So it's, even as you're making profits, but when it comes
Yeah,
to
sorry to interrupt.
looking at your investment
We are
angle,
running short
it
of
is
time. Could you
prudent
please
for you to be
conclude your
able to be
presentation?
within the guidelines as related by the